past. It's also how, in part, how I fell in love with the city. So the earliest I could trace my family to West Florida is the Revolutionary War. And one of the relatives fought here, you know, at the siege of Pensacola. And that really interests me because we don't think about the Native Americans and African Americans who fought here, right? Mm-hmm. We later came back around before the Civil War and have been here ever since, but also have been really involved in organizing, advocacy, local politics, and African American issues since Reconstruction.
Well, so how does knowing about your own family's history help you to better understand Pensacola's history?
Well, I think for anyone, being able to contextualize the story by centering yourself lends more understanding, right? So it's one thing to read the textbook and just say, okay, these people did this here, they did that there, but then ask yourself, well, what was my grandmother doing at the time? How during World War II, okay, my grandfather was alive during that time. What might his life have been like? So then think about it. So there's the individual, and then there's the community, or there's the individual, then there's your family, then there's maybe your church, then your entire community, and then your city, and you can just start being able to connect yourself to your story. And I think that's what makes this telling of history important, because it connects us to it. It makes it more intimate. But of course, that's the genealogist's answer.
Well, so how did you learn about your family's history?
Genealogy, right? So I was interested in it, and with my family we've always had a family historian, and since he passed, I've basically taken up that banner. And but when it's not just my family though, I'm also able to tell the story of my neighbors, like I said, our neighborhood history. Because my own family lived in a lot of different neighborhoods, I was able to learn about our different community histories.
So, you know, a lot of people, when we think of Black history in Pensacola, there's a handful of figures that come up, and James being one of the biggest ones, especially now since there's a bridge named after him. So that's a major event. But you know, outside of Chappie James, though, a lot of Pensacolans don't really know a whole lot about the city's Black history. So how far back does the city's Black history go?
Well, our story begins with Guiomar.
And who's Guiomar?
The named African woman who was on the ship with De Luna. And we know a bit about her from her bill of sale. And she was sold for 300 pesos in Mexico, right? So she's also the first named African woman to be in what would become the United States.
Okay.
And only Pensacola can claim that for now. So we are the children of Guiomar just as much as we are the children of De Luna, right? But she's left out the story. Okay. So it's our responsibility to elevate her next to everyone who was a part of that expedition, because she represents all of those Africans who are unnamed. You see how important that is, especially when we enter this story often during slavery. So even though we have our story to tell, our African story to tell, to be able to name an African woman also allows us to ask questions about where now we know she was from modern day Nigeria, right? So what might her life have been like? What's that Nigerian culture like? It allows us to say, I wouldn't even mind Pensacolians saying we're going to travel to Nigeria because of our connection to Guiomar. So it allows us to open doors for a vision that might have been close to us previously.
Well, it says a lot about her also, just her name itself. It means, well, I know exactly what it means, but it's derived from warrior. So, what does that possibly say about her as a person?
Right, warrior of the land. Like so in my mind, maybe she was someone who resisted. And we know the beginning of African presence in the United States was one of resistance.
Well,
It also shows that, you know, we didn't go quietly into the night.
Yeah.
People often have this false idea that we were just, you know, captured with a net, like in the Furs Roots movie, captured with a net, one by one, put on a ship. No, it was a different story. So let's start this path of Sankofa. You know, the saying says, basically go fetch it. It's not taboo to go back and get what we've forgotten or what we've lost. So
can you explain Sankofa? Can you explain Sankofa?
Yeah, so it's basically a proverb that says, go back and fetch it, or it's not taboo to go back and get what was lost. So in our traveling, in our memory, and in our collective memory, what does it mean, or what could it mean for us to go and remember? And when I say remember, I do mean like remember, putting a thing back together, putting ourselves back together. Because the way we were introduced to ourselves very often through the public school system, or just growing up in America, period, and the first images we see was not one of wholeness. So I really encourage people to put ourselves back together and try to deal with this sense of remembering, so that we can move on whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's an interesting way to think of the word itself too. You know, as a means of bringing this together and bringing these stories and these histories together.
Right, but it's also a part of our story too, though. You know, the breaches and the cracks. That's an important part of our story. So very often, as someone put something on Facebook, and they said that an African person asked, "Well, if Black people picked cotton after slavery, why didn't they just buy all the cotton fields?" Like, that was the question. You know, so you know those cracks in our story, somebody in Africa would not know why we didn't just up and decide to buy all the cotton fields, right? So some people here might not know that about to do. So part of the cracks in our story too is what makes us whole. I think there's a type of art. I think it's some kind of Asian art where they glue it back together, but they put a little gold in it. You know what I'm saying? But the whole piece that's what makes it beautiful. That's us.
Okay. Well, this is actually a good time for us to start some of our polls. So Anna, would you mind starting the polls for us? Maybe throw in our first one. I might be able to do it from my side here, but.
Oh, we'll go ahead and launch that poll.
Okay. And also, while I'm here, thank you to Anna and Daisha for helping in the background. All right, so I have 4 questions for you, and we want to see how you feel about this. Remember, you're not going to get quizzed on any of this, or it's not a grade. But the first question is, how knowledgeable are you about Pensacola's Black history? Do you think you're very knowledgeable? Do you think you're knowledgeable, such as, I know a good bit about Pensacola's Black history? Somewhat knowledgeable? I know a few things, or not very knowledgeable? I know very little about Pensacola's Black history. So I'll give you all a minute to respond.
And while they're responding, could I just ask one more time the name of the woman you were referring to earlier from DeLuna's ship?
Right, Guiomar, Guiomar.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and that's actually going to tie into our next question on our poll, but let's see where this one is. So this is probably a good place where we can stop the poll. So like Teníadé, you're the only expert we have right now, but surely there's other ones out there. And it looks like this is probably about where I suspected. How about you? Can you see that on your side, Teníadé?
Not very knowledgeable. Most people say they're not very knowledgeable. Wow. Well, we're all learning together.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's part of the reason you're here. So hopefully this will inspire other people to start looking up some more stuff after this.
We'll drop some books when it's over, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's go to our next poll question, if we could, please. So looking at DeLuna, the DeLuna colony. Was there an African presence in the DeLuna colony? And I got 3 versions of this. Yes, a large. Yes, but it was small, or no, there was not. All right, give it about 5 more seconds. So jump in there if you can. All right, good. All right, so yes. Well, I guess it depends on the answer. So we have 39% say that yes, there was a large one. The winning, or I should say the most people who answered said yes, but it was small. And the last one was no, there's not. So yeah.
I want to meet those 4 people.
No, they're probably playing with you. So with the, let's talk about the size of the colony too. We don't know exactly how large the colony was. It's between 200 and 500 people of African descent were part of that. And what do you know about that group, or what do you know about the people that were coming over from Africa at that time?
Right. So I of course, I'm like you. I don't know the exact numbers. I don't think we know how many of those people were African and how many were Aztec. But we do know they would have come to do the work, right? To do the labor. And you should get with someone more expert than I, Tom Garner, who can actually tell you about these shards and pieces and parts to match up what might have come from where. But that's the story that unfortunately, because there's not a strong interest in the African presence in Pensacola, is something that's still unfolding, something that's still being researched, right? So it's an opportunity for us to learn more about it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most fascinating parts of looking at Black history in Pensacola, and really Pensacola's history as a whole, is for historians, this is really a largely untapped field. Aren't a ton of academic works that are out there. They're starting to now, but that's a great suggestion to be able to have people look into this and start to dig a little bit more, literally dig a little bit more into this, because these are archaeological sites right now. And if they haven't been discovered, then surely they will be discovered sometime soon. Right.
So that's really the importance of the archives, right? Collecting, preserving, telling these stories. So when your fundamental knowledge base is limited, it becomes very difficult to put these pieces together. And that's also a part of our breaches in remembering. So we look, first of all, we know our early archivist was a whole Klansman, right? So when they started to put the information together, he wasn't thinking about what's important and what's not important, right? So you do have some people, Miss Ora Wells, Miss Georgia McCorvey Smith, Tony McCrae Sr., rest in peace. Some people who had been trying to tell our story for a while now. I know it was their hopes that we would have a museum. It's great to have a museum. We need to start with an archives. We need to have a place where we can collect our materials, because number one, I love y'all, but dropping stuff off at my porch is not the business right now.
So let's talk about the archives then.
Right.
So it's a good play. It's a good segue. And then we'll come back to the, let's just talk about the archives. Okay. So what was your reaction when you found out the news about T.T. Wentworth? Some of the newspapers, it's a big issue. Our friend Tom Gardner was one of the ones who brought this to the light. So what was your reaction?
Well, I already knew. And in fact, I've seen the Klan robes. I've touched the Klan robes. And it was a heart-wrenching experience for me, because it made me wonder, well, who made these? Who sold these? They're numbered. That means each number is associated with a person who wore this. And every robe I'm touching, this person would have hated me. This person would have killed me, right? And how ingrained this part of that part of our story. No, it's our story. It's everybody's story as Pensacolians, and how it was hidden and who was being protected. And remember, when we saw the list, the ledger, we had heard about this ledger already. When we saw it, we saw familiar names. Some of these people we know were involved in some of the lynchings that happened here. Some of the people we knew are connected to law enforcement here. Some powerful people's names. But we also know that those people aren't their children. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, how are these people's children reconciling their relationship with this idea that they might have had about their own grandfather, great-grandfather? And that reminds us that we're still even more connected, right? So here it is on my side. Look, my maternal grandfather, Tulsa. His parents were born in Tulsa. He was born a few years after the massacre. They survived it. I'm a Tulsa descendant. Mm-hmm. Then here it is. I actually grew up with people and still know people whose families I see in this ledger. So it's an opportunity for us to really start with this.
And you're talking about the massacre. And you're talking about the massacre in Tulsa, right?
Right, Black Wall Street, right. So it's really time for us to, we were doing race and reconciliation. This would be a good time for us to start that back. We need to have some heartfelt conversations. We have to reintroduce ourselves to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, they had a couple questions come up, and I was going to answer them if you don't mind. A few people had asked about the DeLuna colony. So if we can go back to that just for a second. One person had asked, is there a book that you would recommend to learn more about Guiamar?
No, there's nothing written about her. Mm-hmm. She's a line in a bill of sale. That's what we know. And it was in Mexico. The bill of sale is in Mexico. A full story. We might have to have our own Black History Fair.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was writing this article for In Weekly about the...
that she was Nigerian.
Yeah, one of the things we had to look at in there was trying to piece together as much as we could of her people, possibly who their people were, where she came from. So, you know of any books on? I believe she's from the Yoruba people. Am I wrong about that?
I think Igbo.
Igbo. Okay. Do you have any books about the Igbo people that might be helpful?
Right. I mean, that's any book in particular. But I would suggest people read books about Africa before colonization.
Okay.
First, and then there's a book about how Africans resisted the slave trade. It was a very transatlantic slave trade lasted for centuries. So remember, take this idea out of your mind of a net over somebody's head. Mm-hmm. So they would respond. It was built into the society. So they responded in their own ways. Sometimes they would just go to the ship and snatch their loved one off the ship. Sometimes they would do that. Sometimes they would buy them back. It was just different ways that they handled the situation. So read about that story.
And one of the other questions that came up was how many people were actually in the DeLuna colony?
I can't remember. Can you remember?
It's around 1,500 people.
1,500. How many ships?
Around 500. And if Tom Garner or Dr. Worth are on here, then feel free to jump and give specifics. But around 500 Spanish, 500 Aztec warriors, which is still fascinating to me. All these Aztec warriors out there where Jerry's driving us in that general area.
Could you imagine if one of those African women got pregnant? They were there 2 years. So if one of them got pregnant, that would be the first baby born.
Wow.
First, you know what I'm saying?
But yeah, there's a lot of possibilities in that.
Right.
To look into.
I mean, somebody got pregnant in 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. 2 years. So roughly around 1,500 people. And we're not 100% sure exactly how many number of enslaved Africans were part of that. So that's why we say between 200 and 500 people. So roughly around 1,500. But that actually puts the whole history into a whole different context, because often we look at that history as solely Spanish, when clearly, just by looking at those numbers, that it certainly was Spanish and the ships were Spanish, but a lot of the people were indigenous folks from Mexico.
And it also reminds us that we have a multiracial story from the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's
From
really
the
not an
beginning.
idea of anyone owning Pensacola's history. We've always been a multiracial
Always.
society. Always.
Always. So it's interesting to think of that from the very beginning, that this is part of our story, a big part of our story. So going back to the archives that you talked about. So not just with T.T. Wentworth, but and for those who don't know, maybe some people aren't joining us right now. There's the T.T. Wentworth State History Museum downtown, it's named after him. There's a big controversy over that. You can look that up in the newspapers if you like. But why do you think it's important to specifically have an archive that focuses on Black history in Pensacola?
Well, there's a deficit in information, and we know that because of the founding, the racist nature of its founding, a lot of it was left out. So we have to repair that, and a part of correcting it would be to start an intense collections process, and that might even have to mean starting somewhere else.
Okay.
Right? You know what I'm saying? So we might even have to just say we just have a Black archives.
So are you going to be the person to do that?
Not in November.
Yeah. We can talk about that later too. Okay, so I had another question that came up in here, and it's going back to DeLuna as well. Teníadé, can you explain the importance of the DeLuna colony for Pensacola's history? I kind of keep forgetting that there's people in here who don't really know a lot about that history.
First, they recently found the settlement, or discovered the settlement, or uncovered the settlement. It's supposed to be the first. Now we say Pensacola 1, St. Augustine 2. But there was another settlement in, I think, from what I understand, archaeologists say it was somewhere around Sapelo Island in 1528. So all this is before 1619, right?
Yeah.
And San Miguel del Gualdape, I think that's how it's pronounced. But that one was a settlement that they haven't found yet. It hasn't been uncovered yet. And ironically, it was lost to disease, now in this current time of a pandemic. So it was lost to basically a epidemic and resistance. So there was a revolt. So it was the same site of the first slave uprising in the Americas. So really, it's there first, we're second, but I don't get lost in that because they haven't found it yet. So
I think anybody
until they find it, we're first.
Well, I think anytime you start to look at history and you start proclaiming this is the first, you're walking into dangerous.
Right. I think we're the first multi-year. That's what we're claiming.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So we have the big asterisk by our first, but we'll still claim it. A little bit.
Yeah, we got it now. It's ours.
We got it. So what do you think are some things that people could do, people at home could do to better understand Black history at Pensacola, but also just Black history in general? Because I think if I had to speculate a little bit, for the folks that said that they didn't know a whole lot about Black history in Pensacola, that I could probably take a guess and imagine that a lot of people don't know a whole lot about Black history outside of a handful of major figures. So what are some things that people could do who don't know a lot about Black history or Black history in Pensacola? What are some things that they could do to better understand this history?
Okay. Well, one of the things we're starting to do is once everything reopens, I'm a great supporter of museums. I think museums are very beneficial because, everybody's not going to read a textbook page to page, but for anyone who is interested in public history, right now, you can just start looking downtown at some of the historical markers. You can follow the John Sunday Society page. We share Black history all the time. We're working on an exhibit, a group of community curators. We're working on an exhibit at the Wentworth Museum. Name's going to be changed, but on the 3rd floor, we're working towards Black history exhibit. This is going to be the largest one that's ever been in Pensacola. This focus on African American history. And I know it's going to be great. You and I are both a part of the project. So that's how I know it's going to be awesome. And now you can visit the Chappie James Museum, make sure they see if they're fully reopened. But and we're going to share those books.
Mhm.
But right now, that really speaks to the need of how much information is out there, but isn't readily available because we don't have this archives, we don't have a museum.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to fix that.
Yeah.
I'm collecting, and I'm working on having us a grand exhibit in hopes of having a museum.
Well, that's a good segue. Can you tell us how you're working on this right now, and maybe the bigger project?
Say it again.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you're working on this and the bigger project that
Right. So third floor, when they first started, it was
third floor of?
the future former Wentworth Museum. Is that one?
Okay. Yeah.
Is that what we're-
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah.
So
State History Museum downtown.
right. Telling the story of Black citizenship,
Mhm.
1865 to 1965.
Mhm.
What it meant for African Americans to negotiate what it means to be America, how we were treated, how we what we embraced, what we rejected, how we resisted.
Mhm.
And it shifts the story from being centered around because remember, we all lived here together, and when you walk through the museum now, kind of told from a whiter European perspective. So we're just gonna tilt that lens, shine on Black folks, talk about all these wonderful things that were happening from Reconstruction to Civil Rights Movement.
So when is that gonna be up?
I don't know. It got pushed back because of COVID.
Mhm.
But we're also celebrating our bicentennial. I'm on the bicentennial committee, and I'm making sure that the African American story is highlighted there too. We have this wonderful story about Pensacola Creoles, a part of our Spanish colonial history. And people often think that Creoles were just in Louisiana. Some recognize them in Mobile, Alabama, but the Pensacola Creole population was small but significant as people. There was what we call, or what I call this Creole expansion. Well, it's two parts. It's one of the people who were just born here, born in the tan yard, born as a result of this early mix of African women, Spanish men, French men, people who migrated from, who came here through the transatlantic slave trade, people who were brought here from Cuba, and just through slavery. Then it was really the first generation of freedmen were really a result of these mix between African women and European men in this place. So we know Dido Bell from with the movie Dido, how her mother lived here and her relationship with John Lindsay. We see in the names, you'll see white folks' names, and then you'll see the African and Black people's names the same, not just because they owned them, but because they were their fathers. I found an article about how it was a wedding, and it was interesting to see these like former Confederates and their Black children, and they're all celebrating a friend's wedding. And you would think this is like the weirdest, like how did they all get here today, right? And then it lists all the gifts that they gave the girl, and besides the presents and what the couple is where they're gonna go. And this was in the 1800s, and at some point in time, we definitely didn't reconcile, but at some point in time, they recognized these unions. We see on Government Street a lot of what they would consider passage, but unions between
what they consider what? Can you say that word again?
Well, this cohabitation of African women or Black women and European men. So it was those children, the products of those unions that were our first generation of freed people. Even till today, though, we can follow the path of those freedmen and see, or free people of color, free before the Civil War, and see advances they made. So, for example, if you are free and you're in Pensacola, like John Sunday, you might pick up a trade in carpentry. We know in his apprenticeship, he was paid less, but he still had a skill. which ultimately was his introduction into becoming a builder. So there was certain types of jobs for free people of color, barbers. To mind comes the name Pons. So when I say Pons and you come from a family that's free before the Civil War, and then you become the mayor, first Black mayor, there's a connection to that. So it was really off of the sweat, skill, adaptability, and even forced relationships with these Black women that Pensacola had a population that was at one point half Black and half free.
Okay. And that's actually a good place to bring in our next poll. So Anna, would you mind putting that up? Okay. So Pensacola's mayors. How many of Pensacola's mayors identified or were identified as either Black, Creole, or Latinx? Let's see what numbers show us. Here, go for a few more seconds. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. All right, we got a winner. We got one. All right, so do you want to talk about him?
Salvador Pons?
Yeah.
No, yeah, well, he actually has a marker. So visit that's another place you can find some of these stories. Oh, I forgot about that. You can visit the cemeteries. We've done a great job of collecting information in cemeteries to put historical markers there. Go to the cemetery.
Okay.
It's not scary. You do that.
Which cemetery? Which cemetery?
St. Michael's, and there's Magnolia and Zion cemeteries. UWF is doing a great job. UWF and PACT are doing a great job with preserving these cemeteries. Margot Strangfield, Catherine Edens, they're doing an awesome job of piecing together these stories. And now that's available to you. So you can just take a walk through there.
Yeah, really beautiful cemetery as well. And I know that might sound odd to some people to say, this is a beautiful cemetery, but when the pandemic was at its height a few months back, this was one of the handful of places you could walk around and you weren't going to bother anybody or get too close to anybody too. So took the kids out there a number of times and we were walking around. And it's fascinating to see all of the markers that are there and then knowing the backstories of some of these people. So in St. Michael Cemetery, for instance, who would you say is the most prominent person of African descent in that cemetery?
John Sunday.
Well, John Sunday Society. Can you tell us a little bit more about John Sunday?
As president of the John Sunday, so John Sunday was born of John Sunday Sr., white father, born in Amsterdam. His mother was an enslaved Black woman. He asked, what do you want for a gift? She said, I want my child to be born free. So he went to the courthouse, drew up the papers, took it to the courthouse and said, upon my death, Jenny's free and so are all my children. At this short time later, the way it's told through the family's oral history says that his white children from his first marriage killed John Sunday. In effect, freeing Jenny and her children when their original plan was to keep them enslaved and sell them. But what we do see is Jenny and her children, a bill of sale for them, but the ages are the same, but the names are different, suggesting that the white children put them on the auction block. His godfather, the same one who he did the apprenticeship with, was able to identify them. They were identified because they all had a sixth finger, a nub that's the sixth finger, and pulled them off the block. The people, of course, they never went to jail for trying to sell their own siblings, but half siblings. Then John went on and got the apprenticeship, grew up, went to the Civil War, U.S. colored troops, Corps d'Afrique. He returned to Pensacola.
You said the Corps d'Afrique?
Right. Came back to Pensacola. He became a builder from the skill that he had learned through carpentry, again, one of those Creole professions. and learned skillful in that, purchased property, eventually brought more and more property in the city. During Reconstruction, he was a member of the House of Representatives, along with other African-American men from Escambia County. And
The State House,
State House, and Florida House, and became one of the first millionaires, I want to say, or close to it. Booker T. Washington wrote about him. And he really represents the resiliency and just hope of what the American dream meant for African Americans, particularly during Reconstruction. You know, it also challenges the idea of Black inferiority. So when these people are supposed to be less than, supposed to, you know, not be able to rule themselves, supposed to need a master to tell them what to do, then somebody like John Sunday comes along, or Zebulon Elijah comes along. These men were, especially if you were a freedman, here it is, your first generation literate. And they were if you look at some of the documents, the way they wrote, very eloquently, they were just very, very intelligent. And passing in during Reconstruction, they're introducing laws or works like public schools, and they're drafting constitutions and drafting bills. And then it's not this, it challenges everything that you might have been taught about, you know, Birth of a Nation. And
you talk about the 1915 film?
Right. So it challenges white supremacy.
Yeah, well, it challenges that idea. I think what you're saying with, if I understand it right, the what Reconstruction was and how Reconstruction was.
And most people, I went to Florida A&M University. We learned about Reconstruction. I from what I understand, most people didn't, or a lot of people didn't. I think you all just learned about like carpetbaggers and scalawags, but we really got to look at Reconstruction and how it represented, to a degree, a promise, even though there was a rise in lynchings, racial terror,
so birth of the Ku Klux Klan.
Right, all these restrictive laws, but that happened because these men and women began to claim their own destiny and to claim citizenship for themselves. And that says a lot about what happens when a person is given an opportunity. When an opportunity is denied you, and then you fight for it, because we know the wave of the war turned when Black people were allowed to start fighting in the Civil War.
The Civil War.
So when you fought, died, earned this thing, your feeling about it becomes more immediate and hard-earned. So what we see even in stories like in the colored convention notes, as they drafted, you know, they weren't, even if they weren't allowed to go to the white colored conventions, they held their own colored conventions pre-Civil War and after.
Are these, can you explain this?
Okay. The colored convention. So you know what a convention is. So the colored conventions were similar, and I think they were held as early as the 1830s, Philadelphia. We had.
Do you mean for the Republican convention?
Right. But it was just the color stuff. The way they drafted issues of concern for African Americans, it often you can see the Constitution in it. You could see how this ideal of Americanness was important to them. And how, and you all, I think the documents are available online, especially the ones from Florida, 1885. We see our own folks from Florida being presenters at the convention, and their connection to their state at the time. I think that was when James Dean was encouraging Black people to just move to Florida. You know, here it is, we're in the corner. If we're all together, we don't have to run anywhere. We're by the water, right? He was just saying, just Florida, but Florida be for the Black people. Like that's what he was proposing. And around that time, a candidate for the state house really ran his campaign was to Africanize Florida. Their position was really okay, this American experience isn't working for us.
Mhm.
Black people are already versed in agriculture. South of, South Florida is pretty much swamp. Don't worry, we'll take it. And remember, those people were also connected to these maroon communities that we had here before the Civil War, runaways that fled.
Mhm.
So they already had pockets of Black Seminoles. So Florida was already doing this interesting thing with African Americans. So they were just just give us Florida. Of course, then Flagler happened, so that didn't work. But they
that's always been
tried.
such a big part of that history and the story too, and things that people just don't. I think a lot of people just don't know about this, about these backgrounds, which makes these talks really important. So that brings up something else. So we talked about John Sunday, and he's becoming much more well known. I think within the last 5 years, since they were going to tear down his house and tore down his he became a lot more well known. But can you talk about maybe just a handful of other people that you think are these really fascinating figures? I know we worked on a couple projects in the past trying to bring to light some of these people. So some other people besides John Sunday and Salvador Pons, our first Black mayor. Who's some other folks that stand out?
I would say, let me see if I could just think of 5.
Okay.
Definitely John A. Gibson.
Okay, so tell me about John A. Gibson.
The current Head Start program, the Head Start program it's the corner of C and Cervantes. It's a school named for him.
Mm-hmm.
It was built and named in his honor shortly after he passed. And he was a councilman, and he did a lot in the Black community. I would just group together Black Freemasons. That's another topic that I just love. Just study Black Freemasons. But particularly the ones in Florida. There's a wealth of resources about them. What we really see is they were leaders in the community, and they almost acted as if they were the government for people who didn't have a government.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
what about
also say
women?
some of the women. Ella Jordan, just the club women. Okay, so you got the Freemasons, and I would even say Eastern Stars, but from that Eastern Stars, Order of Eastern Star, Black club women. Fascinating history related to the club women movement.
So who's Ella Jordan?
Right now we're getting the Ella Jordan house restored, and it was really the meeting place for the Black Women's Club movement, where women who could not even vote were organizing to have a idea of self-determination as much as they could. And it wasn't that they were just like these housewives, and of course they did that, but these women were really committed to organizing for the community, serving their community. Freemasons, Black club women, of course, everyone who held public office in Reconstruction. You're gonna give me 2 more. What
about religion? What about in religion?
Well, not just as a 7th generation member of Allen Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's not the only reason I'm giving you this answer, but definitely AME Church history in Florida. There's a book by one of my former professors, Cantor Brown, Laborers in the Vineyard of the Lord. Really fascinating work about how the development of the AME Church in Florida crossed socially through religion and also politically. On the cornerstone of my own church is the name of a man named James Dean, who I mentioned earlier, and he was the first Black municipal judge in the state of Florida. In Key West. He was removed from office for marrying an interracial couple, I want to say. The couple themselves, though, were saying, hey, we're Cuban. We don't have the same idea of race that you all have in America. We're both of African descent. But he was I think in 2012, the governor reinstated him posthumously. And after the work of some students at Howard. So James Dean, that's another one. And
what about one for music? One for music.
Oh, music. All right. Oh, okay. Well, I would say Wally Mercer because a lot is available about him.
I thought Don Shirley.
Yeah. Hold on. Give me another one. Anybody on the blues marker. So there you go. You get anybody on the blues marker. I gave you James Dean. Well, he was in the AME Church.
Okay.
Anybody, and James Dean was 1884, so that's kind of, puts us in. So anybody in office during Reconstruction, including John Sunday, Zebulon Elijah.
Yeah, and if I can add too, that there's
club women.
a lot of people. Yeah, there's a lot.
Ella Jordan, Alice S. Williams, all these Black club women, and I don't know. I think that's it. I think I messed something up.
That's a good number. All right, so
that'll work.
All right, that's a good number. So let me, Anna, would you put up another poll for us, please? I think
and we do have a few questions in the Q&A if we have time for them.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you. Let's go to some of the Q&A and then we'll get to last poll. All right, so some of these we've answered. And one about John Sunday. I have an article, I don't mean to self-promote, but I have an article that I wrote about John Sunday. There's also one in the Pulse that came out. It was really good. A number of articles that came out a few years back when there was discussion about taking down his house. So to my knowledge, there aren't any books about him, but he is mentioned, as Teníadé said, in T. Washington's book, the Negro, I think is the title of it.
It's the Pensacola chapter, Pensacola Typical Negro Community.
Yeah, an entire chapter in a Booker T. Washington book on Pensacola, which is fascinating. And you could take a look at that on Google Books if you're interested. Do you know of any dramatic movies about our region's Black history in the past or in the works?
Well, a friend and I were having a conversation the other day, and we both noted how, though we both love Reconstruction, because they didn't want to tell the story of Reconstruction, it was just twisted to Westerns. So just after Gone with the Wind, there's this own story, but very rarely do you see the story of Reconstruction in the South. So they were just like, we're just gonna forget all that. We're gonna just talk about cowboys and Indians, right? But no, I don't know of any. Do you know of any movies set in Pensacola?
The only ones I can think of that touch on it would be Dido, the one that you.
Yeah, I mentioned Dido earlier, but they don't even give us any credit in there. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
Okay,
we need to make one.
Yeah, we got a bunch of questions here. So one of the questions was about the archives, and can you tell us about some of the let me see. Can you tell us a bit about the documents that you have and stories that they shed light on?
Right. So people will send me all types of all types of things. In fact, someone gave me or holding for me lynching postcards, things that they find in family members' homes after they pass. For whatever reason, they feel more comfortable giving it to someone who they know will take care of it, who will value it, and who will treat it respectfully. So that's why people call me and tell me they have things that have been, matter of fact, Dr. Vernon McDaniels' papers are in somebody's house and they're waiting for me to come get them. And they've been holding them since he passed, maybe I think in 2000 he passed or some time around that. So they just been waiting for me, number one, to grow up, right? To get them. And then now do what I can do to come get them. Yeah, so, but I'm going to let you all come to the exhibit to see what we come across, what we've come across. All
right. Let me see. So a couple other ones might be able to answer quickly. And let me see. I think we talked about Guiamar a bunch. Do you know anything about African Americans during the 1918 Spanish flu? We talked about COVID.
Right. One of John Sunday's sons was a surgeon, and during that time, and he would not have supported the masks. I can leave it at that.
Okay. All right. So let me see. There's one that talked about the conventions, and let's see. Were these like the Niagara Falls conventions?
No, well, there's a website, coloredconventions.org or .com.
Okay, great. Okay. Let me see. One here. Yeah, actually, we got a bunch. Hopefully, we'll be able to get to all of these. Let's see if I can go through one or two quickly. Okay. Okay, there's one here. In Tom Garner's recent Erasure of History, the article that he wrote, there's a mention of Black Pensacolian named David Alexander, who was lynched at Plaza Ferdinand in 1909. It's a footnote. Is there a link between this lynching victim and the current candidate for sheriff?
We don't know for sure. See, part of the because I've spoken to him about this. Part of that story is that when someone in your family is murdered in that way, people stop talking about it.
Okay.
So we don't know for sure.
Okay.
We can research. We can dig more now that more is available, but we don't know.
All right. Well, speaking of candidates, I wanted to ask you about the district that you're in. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of the district that you're in?
Oh, it's simple. So I'm in the city council district. Oftentimes I tell people, "Hi, I'm running for District 5," and they're like, "Oh no, I'm in District 3." Right, but that's the county. I'm in the city district. So everything in County 3 was a part of a class action lawsuit to help African Americans have representation in local government. So it was a combination of Escambia County School Board. It was not ECO. I don't think ECO was around. Escambia County School Board. It was County Commission, and inside of that was 5, 6, and 7. Now with gentrification and just other factors, it's shifting. But those used to be the majority minority districts, and there used to be an at-large system where, of course, African Americans didn't really have a shot at that. So they drew the lines. So that's why the lines might even look like they do now. They look a little funny, but that's because at the time that's where the highest concentration of African Americans were. Okay. This is the first time really since Black folks were kicked out of office in 1885 that there has been a clean sweep of white candidates going for the traditionally or historically African American seats. So we are really at a loss of losing African American representation. Now, if you want to pretend to be colorblind or pretend that there's no need to address issues related to the African American community, or you think that we don't need this protection anymore, then that's just essentially wrong. You are modeling the same folks who the thoughts of the same folks who lived 150 years ago. But if you believe that Black people should be on city council, then and we shouldn't have an all-white government, then you would vote in that way. And I don't feel I need to. I know I'm a qualified candidate. I'm very qualified to represent my districts.
Well, and that history goes back, though. I mean, for years. What year was that lawsuit?
Right. So they were removed from office from 1885. One remained, but he was a Democrat, and I can touch more on that on another one. But essentially, it just shows us how anytime we have the chance to make advancements toward a multiracial society that we live in, people choose to double down on white supremacy. And look at your heart about why you feel that way. Why do you think, why would you use your power? Because of gentrification, we do have more white voters than Black in some of these districts. So what is it about you that says, okay, now that because of issues related to gentrification and other factors, white people have to be in control now? What is it about you that isn't okay with including African Americans in local government?
Well, looking at this as a historian and as a as well, because you can't separate this, what do you see as the greatest challenge that we have to overcome in our community?
The candidate side is going to tell you COVID and Hurricane Sally, but for history, we need to democratize the museum. We need to make public history more available and more inclusive. I think we need to dismantle this idea that one group matters more than another and tell the full story, tell the full truth. I'm trying to push. Look, I know we only got like a little bit of time left.
Yeah, just about a minute or two more.
Okay.
Well, that's a nice point to bring up as far as the democratization of those fields. A lot of people might not realize that the archives are open to the people. So anybody can take a look at that stuff. And
if you get some kind of if you get like food stamps or even
EBT
Social
cards.
Security, you get in free.
Oh yeah. Oh, for the museum, but I think even the archives are free though, right?
The Travis James Museum is just free.
Yeah. So another one. There's a lot of great places here in Pensacola to check out, and a lot of great resources that we have. And a lot of us are available too. So if you have any questions afterwards.
I can take one more question.
Well, sure. Mhm. Yes. You said one more question?
Mm-hmm.
What?
No, you have one more question?
No, that was the question. What was the challenge? What do you think are the greatest challenges?
Oh yeah, to
Yeah,
democratize the museum.
Okay, yeah. So lastly, then here's one more question then for you. You mentioned books. So what are some books that you wanted to give shout outs to?
Oh well, we have Aiming for Pensacola about how Pensacola was Underground Railroad southbound. You had people from plantations in Georgia and South Carolina. If you could get to Florida, you could be free.
And John Sunday's in that too.
The battle of
Oh, that's by Matt Clavin.
Matt Clavin, the Battle of Negro Fort, the rise and fall of a fugitive community. Mm-hmm. That was a third of those people came from Pensacola who established the Negro Fort. Here is a book I helped with when I was a student, Images at UWF.
That was mentioned by somebody in the comments too.
Right, Images in Black, a pictorial history. And then a new one, Pensacola's People of Color, The Long March to Freedom by Norm Haynes.
Ah, great.
And this is a new one.
Where can you get that book?
Well, I got it from his house. I'm not going to give his address out over the internet.
Right,
so if you just hit up Norm Haynes on in the East Hill group, in fact, he lives in my district. Right. And this is really what I'm promoting right now.
All right. And there was one more too. Somebody mentioned in one of the comments, and I know that's a book that you had read by Butler. The book on Escambia County.
Oh yeah, Beyond Integration, Escambia County, and that one is a real good example of about what's happening now and how what happened after. I think it starts to 1975 or into 1975, something like 77. I can't remember, but that's a good book, and it really talks about how what we did after King. Okay. And what made Ralph Abernathy come here and say Pensacola was one of the most racist places he'd ever been.
Do you think it's changing?
Yes, we have to have hope. See, we're beautiful, we're terrible. Sometimes y'all just embarrass me, but we have to have hope. Because if not, we may as well just hang it up, right? We may as well, everybody just may as well go home if we're not going to work better to improve things.
So what gives you hope then? We'll leave that as our last question. What gives you hope?
Well, every time I see someone come to me and say, I'll tell you, somebody was talking about John Sunday and they didn't know who I was. And they were talking about his house. They were talking about all that they learned. They told me that their son wrote a paper about John Sunday and how he wants to be a historical preservationist when he grows up. This little boy in Gulf Breeze. And I'm just sitting there like, wow. So our work is working. People know our hashtag was Save John Sunday. And at first we were just talking about the house, but now we have people in Pensacola talking about just the overall, just saving houses, period. Just the importance of preservation, the importance of Black history. People know who John Sunday is now. I'm so unbelievably proud of that.
Yeah, and at least 100 plus people that are joining us now know about John Sunday too. So if you didn't know about him before, you certainly can. There's lots and lots to dig into. You
can visit us at johnsunday.org.
Okay, what is it?
johnsunday.org. We have I'll let you go to the site because I just know we don't have time. So
yeah. All right. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. There's so much more. If Teníadé, then you can a wealth of information. This is probably the shortest conversation the two of us have ever had. So I want to thank you so much for being here and joining us. And again, I want to thank everybody who came in and participated. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them our way, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. So next week, our discussion is going to be about poetry. We have Quincy Hall, goes by the name Q. A lot of you know him. And his title is called, or the title of the talk is called Black Poets and the Struggle for Racial Justice. And we have several more coming up. I urge you to sign up for all those. And again, thank you to everybody who helped set this up. And also thank you to everybody who's behind the scenes working on this. And thank you especially to Teníadé for being here and joining us. So.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I went first, right? And I survived.
Yeah, they're the first. Historic first.
Right,
Famous.
right. And I'm looking forward to attending or watching on Zoom.
All right.
When Haley comes, we got Indigo Lad. Who else?
We
Q.
got one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's gonna be awesome. Thank you so much for having
All right.
this. And you
Yeah,
can actually
thank
have
you.
your office back now.
All right. All right.